All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Unbiased America Live. We're here again with our regular panel. We have Grant Phillips there, all the way to the left of the Modern Libertarian, and we are capitalists. You reposted a piece this week, Grant. I can't remember what it was on, but it was good. Oh no, you did that. You did a piece on was it the cups? The
Oh
red
yeah,
cups.
I had that, but today I published a piece on gun control. It's called "Gun Control Advocates Do Not Understand Gun Violence." It's on the
Uh,
Libertarian Republic. It's also
I'm
on my
shocked
page.
by that premise, by the way.
Yeah, I know, right? Who would have thought that?
So check out his stuff. That's really good. The cup one was really popular. I saw that got a ton of hits. I don't know why. You're ugly, but whatever. Um, we also have Kevin Ryan, the red guy there that probably had too much scotch before he came on the air.
Red?
Yeah, you look red. Does he look just red to me? Or is he
Yeah, I
red
was
to you?
thinking that when he first got on too, but I was still caught up by the hair. So
It's that
What
incredibly
hair?
Irish skin you have, my friend.
What?
You know, you probably had a couple. You probably had some bad scotch.
I'm
and you
out of
got a
here.
little flush. Anyway, Kevin's from Unbiased America. As you see his large foyer and his French doors in the background, along with his fireplace, he's
God,
clearly
they're
part of the
still
1%,
talking about me.
and he's part of the problem. We also have back Michael Lee, who's Being Liberal Logic is now conjoined with We Are Capitalists. We Are Capitalists is this Facebook hegemony that's taking over all the other pages. Sounds like capitalism to me. Very hegemonic and myopic. So thanks for that, Mike. And
they're
you're at
kill
you're
they're
also
killing the small pages. They're
yeah, I know.
they're just there's no more small pages.
Yeah, it's like Bain Capital. You know what I
I
mean?
know.
You're taking over all these companies and putting them out of business. Great job, guys, over there.
And
Also, we have a very
I'm the only representative from BCL today. Got to give them a plug.
that's true, and being classically liberal, true. And we also have myself, Will Riccadella from Unbiased America. We also have a special guest today, Mary Ruwart, who has several books out. Your latest one that is coming out. It's coming out. I'm sorry, next in the spring.
Next year, yeah, probably summer.
Okay, next year in summer, and it's on the FDA, and it's called Death by Regulation, which is a very interesting topic that never really gets enough. It really never gets enough press because you never hear about these unnamed people that have suffered because the drugs that they needed never came to market, or you never hear about stifled innovation in the drug market that could have helped many people that needed it, but large regulation costs have hindered innovation and have hurt people. You also have Short Answers to Tough Questions, and that's out on Amazon. And Healing Our World is out on Amazon too. And you mentioned somewhere where they can buy those at a discount for
Yes.
Christmas.
If they go to my website, ruwart.com, ruwart.com, just like my name, they can get $5 off each of the books. And Healing Our World has a Christmas special. You can get an additional $5 off for a total of $10 off the $29.95 price that you'll see on Amazon.
And can you give me a short description of Short Answers and to Tough Questions? What's the basic premises of the book?
Well, I did a column for about 15 years for the Advocates for Self-Government where people would ask me a question, and I tried to give basically a soundbite answer so that candidates could use that. And
Good
I had to
idea.
do that because I ran a lot, and I got challenged a lot, so I started doing that. And so that's... And it's also good for your friends and family who really don't want to sit for 4 hours, you know.
Yeah.
We'd like them to, but let's face it, they won't. So we give them a short answer that gets them interested in hearing more. And
That's a good idea. I've always wanted to, make my answers more concise because, if you drone on or you talk to overly complicated people, their eyes glaze over. You know what I mean? No one wants to listen to that.
That's right.
Healing Our World.
Yes, that's the 4th edition of Healing Our World. It's really still, I think, probably the most complete compilation of how liberty works in the real world. It's got 1,300 references in this particular version. Yes, so you don't have to take my word for anything, and you can actually get the references to show your friends and family or use them in your own materials if you're running a campaign. It also addresses the questions that come from Christians, liberals, environmentalists, and New Agers. So, and liberals. So, I mean, if you have trouble talking to those groups, it's a great book, and it really, I tried to take the libertarian philosophy and really put it in there in a way that anyone could understand, and most people get a copy, and then they buy one for a friend or family member.
Mm.
And they come up to me at conventions and say, if my husband had explained it to me this way, I would have been a libertarian 10 years ago. So it's a great Christmas gift. You know, it really, and I like to think it's very upbeat. It really shows that universal prosperity and abundance and peace are really possible. So it's a great Christmas gift. It really fits in with the season.
That's a no-brainer. That is a good Christmas gift. I was actually going to send Kevin a lump of coal from California, but now I'll order him your book. You know what I mean? And maybe he'll look at the references and come up with a halfway.
Too late. I bought it at the full rate. I didn't know about the discount.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
What a fuck up.
Unbelievable.
Well, and there's volume discounts too. If you buy a lot of them, you get a better price. So it's a great Christmas gift. That's why I self-publish it. It's a pain in many ways, but it's wonderful because then libertarians can share it.
Yeah, that is cool. Before we get to death by regulation, I have an interesting question to ask. You have your doctorate in biophysics, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so in academia, you largely focused on biology. Your undergraduate, I think, was in something similar. What got you into What got you into politics, and more importantly, libertarianism in general?
Well, when I was in college, I read Ayn Rand, and I realized that, I felt strongly about helping the poor, for example, and I realized that if I put a gun to somebody's head and took their money for the poor, that was less loving than a person who just was so selfish they wouldn't give anything. And that really sold me. And I actually rented to the poor for a long time and found out that the welfare payments that at the time I thought were going to help them actually kept them in the poverty trap. So I've learned that the ends and means are intimately related, and we try to do good things with bad means. It doesn't work out.
So I was under the impression that libertarians hated the poor, Mary.
Hated the what?
I was under the impression that libertarians hated the poor. Why are you smashing a part of my narrative here?
The poor are a creation of government. Really, poverty today is a creation of government. The licensing laws, minimum wage laws, there's so many things that really keep the disadvantaged down, and we can do something about them.
Mary? Why do you think that is? Do you think that's to keep them dependent on government and politicians?
Probably. Some people think of it that way. I think some people think sincerely that it helps them. But the nice thing about running as a libertarian candidate is you can share your stories. And I actually ran against one woman 3 times. She was a sitting state representative, and it was great because at the end of the 3 times I ran against her, she came up to me and said, I actually voted to privatize welfare. And she was all excited about it because she was a strong liberal. She didn't want any part of it. But if you approach people correctly, and liberals really want results, if you approach them correctly and with compassion, I think they really, the light bulb goes off.
Geez, maybe that's my problem, because whenever I try to present this stuff in factual ways and I try to be kind, I just branded a racist. But I don't know, maybe I'm doing something wrong.
Well, there are times I think when you do need to push back a little bit. I have a hard time learning that, but it's coming.
Right. So your book, Death by Regulation, and then we'll get the rest of the guys in here because Kevin did a post on this on Unbiased America before we came on the air, right, Kevin? And you used some of Mary's statistics.
That's right.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. So make sure you send me a link.
Well, I'll talk about it in a bit.
Okay, great.
What spurred the book? Is it? I mean, you seem like a very compassionate person, and I've always thought, but this is always. I mean, I read Free to Choose a number of years ago, and he made a strong case against the FDA. And then, going into economics, I learned the economics of regulations and the immense costs that a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, have to overcome in order to get one drug approved because of FDA regulations, and moreover, those large costs crowd out smaller, innovative companies that are there's no way that they're going to be able to pay those costs. And you have what the left deems big pharma constantly, and they don't understand that these things are created by government. So,
yes.
what is that kind of was it frustrating to you what was going on, and no one was highlighting it? Is that kind of what was
the impact of these regulations as time went on? And I could see them as an insider. And what I realized is that none of the insiders would dare to speak up even if they knew this, because it sounds so self-serving, right? all these regulations, instead of protecting the American public, are hurting them. Well, if a big pharma person says that, what happens? You know, no one's going to believe them. But I'm out of the industry now, and I wouldn't have dared actually say this if I were in the industry, because the FDA can punish a company if they don't like what's coming out by simply making them do more studies for their drug.
Right.
The FDA can determine which companies survive and which ones don't. And so nobody would speak up. But when I actually presented this work at a science meeting one time, I had a lot of researchers coming up to me and saying, "Oh, I'm so glad somebody's speaking out. I can't because I'm still working for the industry." But
that's incredible. That's fascism.
Yes.
That infuriates me. Grant, do you have any questions on the FDA? Go shoot.
Yeah, I do. So when you talk about government intervention, in as far as in the pharmaceutical industry goes, I read this economist who made the statement that government-enforced patents increase the price of drugs to consumers by, I think it was $250 billion a year. So where are you on the IP side of the issue? Is it patents are hurting consumers, or FDA, or is it both, or one more than the other?
Yeah, the reason why patents are necessary in the pharmaceutical area is because the regulations are so costly, both in terms of time and money, that the only way the companies can recoup their costs is by having a temporary monopoly, which is what the patent gives them. When I was in the industry, we were in research, we used to propose developing compounds that didn't have patents, and they were seriously considered. But about a year or two after I joined the Uptown Company, that policy changed. And all of a sudden, we weren't allowed to even propose developing a compound that didn't have a patent. And this was when, of course, the regulations were adding so much to the cost. And they've increased even farther. So there's no way a company can ever recover costs. In fact, only about 3 out of 10 drugs recover their cost.
Wow. Yeah, and a lot of libertarians are strongly against patents, and I see their argument, and in the sense that the government is interfering in the innovation side of the industry. But at the same time, I totally agree. Like, if you're going to shell out possibly $1 billion to bring this drug to the market, just in FDA testing, you're going to expect to be able to protect your idea somehow, and then you're going to have a generic drug come along, and who knows how long, and sweep you under the rug.
Yeah, I think if we didn't have so high development costs, we wouldn't have the need for the kind of patents. And I have several patents myself, and I can tell you, it's a game. I mean, the patent office is so overwhelmed, they approve contradictory patents. They try very hard not to, but this whole business about patenting genes, they've kind of just thrown that out after years of saying it's okay, and that's causing a lot of havoc. It's not what most libertarians think of. The ideas, it's very hard to make clear-cut claims. It's very difficult.
Now, my next question, sort of building off the FDA, I recently did a post, just sort of some quick facts about the pharmaceutical industry, that drug innovation in the U.S. has come to an almost complete halt, and now the FDA approvals being submitted are just new iterations of the same drug, sort of like revision A is now becoming revision B, and no one's coming up with new drugs because it costs so much money. Do you see that happening as well? Do you see that happening while you were working in the industry? If you could shed some light on that.
Yes, it's hard to put a brand new drug on the market. Let me give you a real life example. The FDA actually called me up one day and said, "Dr. Ruwart, we understand you just applied for a patent for prostaglandins and liver disease." I said, "Yes, that's true." They said, "We are so excited about this because 100,000 people die every year. There's nothing for it but bed rest," which of course isn't very helpful. And they said, "We'll do everything we can to make sure your company develops this drug." Now, you would think we would have had an easy path, but no. The reason we didn't is that liver disease takes years to develop and probably takes years to cure. So we didn't know how long we had to study our patients. We didn't know how many doses we had to give every day. We didn't know what the standard dose would be. And, of course, we didn't know how many people we'd have to look at to make sure we got the statistical significance that the FDA requires for its studies. So the chances were very good. We would goof the first time and spend years doing a study that failed the FDA's criteria, and then we'd have to go back and do it over again. And if we did, our drug would be off patent before we got it approved, and we wouldn't have a prayer of recouping our costs because it'd go generic the first day it was out. So there was something brand new, but a brand new drug, I mean, for a really, really brand new indication, is hard to develop because there's so many unknowns. So yes, it discourages innovation. It's much easier for a company to say, okay, we know from historical data that if we develop a knockoff of this very popular drug, we'll get X% of the market if we do our marketing right. And so they can count on that. So of course, that's what they have to prefer to do.
Now, of course, whenever I make an argument to get rid of the FDA, get rid of this approval process, the immediate reply that I get from the left is, oh, if you don't, Big Pharma will release all these drugs and it's going to kill all these people, and there's all these recalls like Tylenol, blah, 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 blah. And all I can think to myself is they got through the FDA approval process and they're still recalling them. So clearly it's not that effective to begin with. But on top of that, I find that I can't make the economic argument for saying it won't happen, because I think it still will happen, that a drug will get onto the market that might harm some people or whatever. What is your take on that typical leftist reply of we need this bureaucracy to protect us from evil Big Pharma?
Well, that's part of the reason I'm writing this book, because what I show in the book is that the regulations that gave the FDA its teeth in 1962 have caused about 1 out of 5 Americans who have died since then to have their lives shortened significantly. And if you think about it, if you look at before the 1962 regulations and after, I mean, there's a lot of power the FDA got after. The withdrawal rate is almost identical. In fact, it's a little less before the amendments. And then if you look at the safety, of the drugs that have been withdrawn, the biggest drug disaster in history was Vioxx, and it was approved by the FDA. And so, there's really, if you look at all the data, there's no data that suggests it's more safe, but there's a lot of data that suggests it isn't. And let me just give you one small example. When these regulations were put into place, it took the drug development time, the time it takes to go from the lab bench to the market, from 4.5 years to 14 years. And what happens is people die waiting. That number is bigger than all of the problems we've had in drug safety. And it's very easy to calculate because we know, how long the drugs take to get through the process. So, and that's the smallest problem that we have. I mean, that's the small one. The bigger problems are loss of innovation and loss of our ability to advertise the use of prevention, nutritional prevention, for unpatentable vitamins and minerals. So it's really horrible when you think about it. I mean, that's why 1 out of 5 people have died, and that's a conservative estimate. The reality is probably we've all been affected negatively. In other words, we've lost years of our lives.
All right, my last question is, have you seen the movie Dallas Buyers Club?
Oh, yes, I did. I did.
I love that movie. I watched it again like 2 weeks ago. It's a great movie.
Yes, and it's very interesting because of this increase in the time of development, the AIDS patients didn't want to die waiting. So they broke a bunch of laws to help themselves, which of course I think is great. And sometimes the FDA didn't go after the buyers clubs, the ones in California specifically, but they did go after the lone wolves, which is of course what the Dallas Buyers Club is all about. And it's really sad because they're literally taking life-saving drugs away from dying people. And because of the placebo effect, it doesn't even matter if they work. Because of the placebo effect, somebody who takes a drug that doesn't work is going to get cured by the placebo effect. And I really don't think dying people care, if they get the placebo effect. Now, the cancer patients didn't want to go through that, so they actually sued the FDA. And they I got to get this program off. It's making noise. Okay. So they sued the FDA, and when they did, the FDA fought back, and the courts ruled. The Supreme Court refused to hear this case, by the way. So the lower court ruling stood. Americans do not have the constitutional right to try to save their lives with unapproved drugs. That was the ruling. And it's going to be revisited because the cancer patients and the ALS patients, they're all going to the black market.
Yeah, my body, my choice, right?
Yep, exactly.
Thank you very much. I'm sure some of the other guys have questions for you.
Kevin.
I just have a follow-up to Grant's question real quick. Can I get that in? Now, Grant was talking about, he touched on the approval process and the patents. I've always kind of gone against the libertarian grain on IP and patents, especially when it comes to pharmaceuticals, because without that, I never did think that pharmaceutical companies would have any incentive to develop these drugs. And you mentioned that the reason for that is because of the regulatory process. Is there anywhere that we could find kind of a ballpark figure on how much the regulatory process actually costs these companies? And do you think that getting rid of these regulations altogether would eliminate that cost, and then we wouldn't need patents anymore?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll be presenting the costs in my book. They've actually been well studied by Tufts University. So the costs are there. They're growing exponentially. So they're over $1 billion per new drug now. And, by new drug, I mean a new entity, a new chemical or a new biological entity. So it's really expensive. And we can actually see the difference between what it would have been if the amendments hadn't passed and, what it is now. So yes, we can tell that. We can show that the safety isn't there. There's no increase in safety. And the reason is simple, actually, and I meant to mention this when I was talking earlier about safety, is that the reason bad drugs get on the market is not because they aren't tested. It's because the kind of testing we do still has a lot of uncertainties. Animal studies only show so much. Even when you do limited studies in people, you often can't tell what's going to go wrong because you just don't know. We're genetically different. So when a large number of people take something, then we find out that certain subpopulations have problems. And that's why we have bad drugs getting to market, and we'll always have bad drugs getting to market, which is why you shouldn't be taking a drug unless you really need to. And that's why prevention is so important, and why it's also important to use nutritional support whenever you can, because if you don't, then you have to turn to drugs and you're taking a bigger risk.
Okay, makes sense to me. I look forward to seeing the actual figures. That'll be really interesting. So yeah. I'll have to get your book then for those.
You can get a preliminary view of I wrote a white paper on it several years ago. If you go to my free library at my website, you can actually get a copy of it. It's called Deadly Secrets Behind Soaring Pharmaceutical Prices.
Oh, okay, yeah, definitely. I'll have to take a look at that then. That's interesting.
You'll get an idea of where I'm going with the book.
Okay, great.
Kevin, you had a post out today on UA. Can you explain that a little bit and go into detail on that?
Yeah, it's a repost of something I wrote last year, talking about essentially what Dr. Ruwart was talking about earlier, the amount of people that die waiting for a drug to be approved, and whether or not whether that cost is worth the benefit of having an entity like the FDA. And the numbers are staggering, and I've tried to read this on this show before, and I butchered the names of all these drugs. So this time I'm just going to tell you what the drugs do. 22,000 people died waiting for a drug that dissolved clots in heart attack patients. 8,000 people lost their lives while the FDA reviewed a drug that reduces gastric ulcers. A 5-year delay in approving Septra, an antibacterial drug, cost 80,000 lives. A 3-year delay in introducing the first beta blocker resulted in 30,000 lives. 3,500 lives for a delay in a kidney cancer medicine. 150,000 for a delay in a blood clotting drug called TPA. Another drug cost 200,000 American lives while people were waiting. I mean, it's just one after the other, and these are just a few of them, and some of them came from Dr. Ruwart's book. And then I tried to quantify, and this is harder to do, how many people have been saved by the FDA. And I want to see if Dr. Ruwart has some better idea of the numbers of this. The worst drug I could come up with that existed before the FDA became an entity in terms of the damage it did was, and I'll butcher this name too, elixir sulfanilamide or something like that. Which was a poorly researched drug that resulted in about 100 people dying.
That's
now,
right.
I'm sure there were others. Maybe maybe you have more knowledge of that. But has the FDA really protected people, or is this a cost-benefit analysis that has almost no benefits?
Now, if you look at the work of Greninger, who I'm sure you ran into when you did this analysis, he actually estimated. He thought there was maybe like something like a 4 to 5-fold factor between the lives that were lost by FDA and the lives that were saved. Now, his numbers were put together in the 70s, where the number of years it took to develop a drug were less. So if you look at the number of years that it's taken to develop drugs by decade since the 62 amendments and before, and you try to look at what happened before 62, I think the maximum that I calculated that the FDA could possibly save in a decade was 7,000 lives. If you looked at the now this is pre-1962. So, because that's when they really got their teeth. So if you think about that for a moment, you just rattled off a bunch that happened after the amendments that were way bigger than that.
Yeah.
And in fact, according to my calculations, and I'm only doing this for innovation and delays, there's about a factor of 100 difference. That's what I'm calculating. It's pretty big. And I'm not counting prevention. I'm not even counting prevention because I have no way to get my hands around that in terms of quantifying it. Even I suspect it's bigger, but I can't prove it.
Well, the FDA actually prevents makers of things like baby aspirin for years. They prevented them from advertising baby aspirin as having a beneficial, 1-a-day baby aspirin will help you your heart disease, as well as winemakers aren't allowed to say that wine is shown to have a benefit. 1 glass of wine a day is beneficial. I mean, they will jail or fine companies that actually make these claims. So for years, a relatively innocuous item like low dose aspirin was not allowed to tell people. They were not allowed to advertise it, that they are actually beneficial in terms of staving off heart disease. So that right there has got to be tough to quantify. How many people died from not knowing that information? I take a baby aspirin every single day, but I didn't know about it until not too long ago. So
well, and in the 60s, Bayer actually wanted to put a calendar pack together and like a birth control pack, for aspirin, so people would be taking the right amount. But when they found out what the new regulations required, they backed off. So we're talking a lot of years that we could have known this. And one of the things people will say is, oh, if we didn't have the FDA, we'd have thalidomides. Well, actually, we did have an American thalidomide, and most people don't know about it. And it was because of these regulations. Folic acid, a B vitamin, does prevent very serious birth defects like spina bifida. And we knew this in the early 80s. But the FDA told the folic acid manufacturers if they told this to doctors or advertise it, they'd shut them down. Then, when the Center for Disease Control, another government agency, started telling young women, hey, if you're of childbearing age, you should be taking this folic acid because, the bad things happen the first month or 2 of pregnancy. Well, the folic acid manufacturers obviously wanted to refer to that, but again, the FDA said, if you talk about that, we're going to shut you down. So, there was about 15 years there, and maybe about 25,000 children affected who, basically were institutionalized. I mean, at least the thalidomide kids had a good their brain worked and it was just missing limbs. These spina bifida children, I mean, they really are sick. They almost all of them end up in an institution, or they die right away, or they're aborted because you can test for it, when they're still in the mother. So it's really sad. We've had the American thalidomide, and it's because of the FDA.
And this is one of the hardest arguments to make to people, even to some people who share the beliefs in liberty and so forth, is that the FDA does more harm than good. I have had the hardest time convincing people of this argument. Mm-hmm. I think of almost any argument I have, and the biggest response I get from people in terms of rebuttal, a so-called rebuttal, is, well, what's to stop these other companies from giving us snake oil, from giving us a product that people talk about. What was the one that helped cure tired blood? The big one from the game show years. Anyways, it's still out there. It made some dubious claims, and a lot of people bought it, and all it basically did was give you a lot of iron into your system. What's to stop these people from just flooding the market with products and claiming that it's going to cure everything, and these claims are based on no research?
Well, actually,
FDA. What would stop people from doing that?
Well, actually, in a sense, we had that system before 1962, because before 1962, the only thing that pharmaceutical manufacturers had to show was that their product was safe for the indicated use. They didn't have to show it worked. So we have a good testing system here. So how many drugs actually didn't work? Well, the FDA put together a committee after 1962 of physicians to evaluate which drugs didn't work. And there were actually several ways this was handled. And the number that seems to keep coming up is about 10% of the drugs didn't work for what they were sold for. Now, that's not too bad, because when the doctors evaluated before and after the amendments, they still found, the physicians themselves, in a separate study, other than what I referred to, there were like 3 studies that I just referred to. In another study, the doctors said, okay, after the amendments, we only had about 10% ineffective drugs, but before we had 20%. Well, that's not a whole lot when you think of it, because drugs are not effective in everyone. In other words, if I take something, and it works for me, it might not work for you. That's just the way it is, because we're all different genetically. We are different ages, we eat different foods. There's a lot of things that go into whether the drug will work. I think the number I saw was about drugs work in about 30 or 40% of the people that take them, because, again, everybody isn't the same. So that's not too bad. 10% ineffective drugs, that's not too bad. And that's about what we'd have. and
my last question, actually, you tie a lot of this together in your book by talking about aggression. Mm-hmm. Aggression is a central theme for you. Mm-hmm. And it's also become a big theme in the libertarian movement. Is in terms, I'm getting an echo too. I don't know where that's coming from.
I don't hear it.
No? Okay. Anyways, aggression is a central theme in your work, and it's become a big talking point amongst libertarians in terms of, the difference between the so-called libertarian ideology and the other ideologies is the belief against aggression, the non-aggression principle, and so forth. And you use that as a central, to tie in a lot of the negatives in society are a result of aggression. I wanted to see if you could flesh that out a little bit, because it was a great part of your book, and I really took a lot from that theme, and I just wanted to give like a taste of that to our viewers.
Sure. Well, it actually is kind of a result of the ends and means. Aggression, of course, we are hurting someone. We're stealing from them, defrauding them, or actually physically assaulting them. And if we do that, even if we do it for a good purpose, almost always we're going to find that it backfires. And that's a big part of healing our world, because most kids aren't making that connection, that the ends and means are related. And so what happens when they can't figure out a way that things would work in a free society, sometimes say, oh, well, in this case, we do need government aggression. But what they haven't put together is that it backfires every time. And that's basically the theme of, and I think one of the more unique things about healing, it makes that connection. Healing tries to tie several things that we don't normally think about as libertarians together in a way that you can come out with an entirely different perspective. By entirely different, I don't mean a non-libertarian perspective. I mean, I'll say the next step in the evolution of our libertarian philosophy. And that was a gift I had just because, I don't know why it was given to me, but it was a moment of what I'll call revelation. It all came together. It's what happens with us scientists. The data floating around in our head comes together and makes a picture. And I was very fortunate to get that. And that's why I wrote Healing, because I feel that's something that should be shared, and it really changes the way we look at things. You know, we're very negative as libertarians sometimes. We look at the government and say, oh, you know, the government's doing this and the government's doing that, and, you know, and of course in our little piece of time that we're looking at things, it looks like it's negative. But if you really think on a wider scale, you know, the U.S. as the freest nation in the world has only been around for 200 or 300 years. Granted, we've kind of lost some of that, but the ideas are out there. The demonstration that freedom creates wealth, and creates it for the poor especially, and really can get rid of hunger and starvation and disease, that's really a miracle. And the reason the third world doesn't have that is because the third world has lots of government aggression. You know, Stossel, if you remember, Stossel had this program where he tried to open a Frisbee business in New York, India, and Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, it took him a few hours. In New York, it took him, I think, days or weeks. But in India, it was going to take him 5 years, and there was no guarantee they'd ever clear him for his Frisbee business. Well, that's why the third world is poor. They have more government aggression than we do.
But like you said, though, everyone's always saying, you know, especially the left, oh, the poor, and I agree. I don't want to see anybody poor, but what they do is the only way to attack poverty is to create more wealth, and they attack wealth creators constantly.
Yeah, I mean, they don't get it. They don't make the connection. And this is partly why I wrote Healing, for them.
Right? I mean, you know, man was born into poverty and misery, and I mean, that was most of his existence.
Yes.
We don't need to explain poverty. We need to explain prosperity. How are people getting rich? How is this happening? Why do we... I mean, the middle class in this country have the highest standard of living of any human being on the face of the earth as have walked before them. We don't seem to want to explain that. We seem to look at, you know, like you said, what's the negatives? I mean, yes, the poor people in this country, I think it was people in poverty in the United States live like the upper middle class does in Mexico. Why is that? We have wealth creators here, the people that everybody attacks all the time. We keep increasing our pie here, you know what I mean? And I don't. You see this with politicians, and you see this a lot with people when they do their tax policy. I mean, we watch the debates, and you see that some propose a 10% flat tax or 15% flat. Well, how are you going to pay for that? Or, you know, how, as if people just are robots. And, you know, me keeping more of my money doesn't mean I'm going to perhaps save more, and then other people are going to be able to invest it and create more wealth, and then you create a larger tax base. And then, in fact, just like any other time, under Coolidge, under Kennedy, under Bush, and under Reagan, you had these, when they cut taxes, you had these, you know, you had the greatest amount of money coming into the government that we've ever seen before. So I don't know if I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of where wealth comes from. Would you agree?
Yes, and you know what? It wasn't always that way. I lectured for 10 years in the Kalamazoo government classes, both in high school and college, and I had a libertarian hour, basically, you know, where I came in and did the libertarian spiel. And when I started out, if I said, we all know that government is more efficient, the private sector is more efficient than government, everyone nodded their heads. They knew. But the end of this 10 years, when I said something like that, the teacher would argue with me that wasn't so.
I believe it.
Yeah, there has been an evolution. We were talking about this a little bit before the show. There's been an evolution in what is taught that is going in the completely wrong direction. And a lot of the people who have studied this believe it's because the left or the left and conservatives really are both the same in a sense. They promote aggression. So that promotion of aggression is continuing on, and I think it started because back in the early 1900s they took on this idea that yes, it's great to have freedom, but freedom and liberty doesn't help the poor, doesn't protect the environment, blah blah blah. Now back then, even if you knew better, you really didn't have a leg to stand on because there were no studies. But right. Now the studies are unequivocal, and that's one reason, again, I wrote Healing, because it's all there. It's been done.
I'm really curious, though, Mary, what evidence did they present when they said that freedom and liberty doesn't help the poor? Like what?
Nothing. Well, they didn't. It just sounded right because they basically used they put out this idea and they said, well, they said, oh look, the free market has created the Great Depression. It's only because we have these. I know. Yes,
I can't take it.
Not right, but that's what they said. Yes, and unfortunately, a lot of people fell for it. Now, it was interesting. Actually, it took a while for people to fall for it. In spite of the fact you could go and get free stuff during the Depression, a lot of people said, "I'm not doing that. I'm not taking a handout. I can support myself."
Right.
There was a certain amount of pride. Today, okay, it's very different. I've run into welfare recipients, and what they say is, Mary, you work too hard. You work at Upjohn during the day, you work at the apartments at night. What you need to do is quit your job, have kids, and get on welfare so you can have a life.
Are you serious?
I swear, that is what I was told. This woman, she really liked me. She was trying to help me.
Oh my! It's like the opposite. You know what I mean?
It's like
the hardworking people would tell you got to get a job, you got to get into school, and now it's the other way around. Lose your job,
have
right. Kids out of wedlock, and get on welfare, man. It's like an inversion.
That's right. There's generations of welfare recipients. I had young women come to me and say, okay, I've gotten pregnant now, and I'll be getting my welfare check shortly, so I can have my own home. Of course, what happens is, at least in Michigan where I was, they have the second and third child because when they have the first one, they go, wait a minute, this isn't enough to raise a child on. But if I have another one, it's kind of cheaper by the dozen, so to speak. By the time they have the third one, because that was the limit in Michigan, they're going, this isn't going to work. I need a job. But now they go into the job market without a high school diploma. They have 3 children that need child care.
Yep.
They're stuck unless they have a family member that'll take care of their kids while they go through. And they take
now the cry is someone has to pay for their child care. You see.
I'm sorry.
Now the cry is that somebody has to pay for their child care.
Yes.
Will, it's probably your best hope. Just drop out, have a few kids. Keep living in your little closet over there.
It is like a little closet, and I do live in abject poverty, but I did have cereal today, so. But
it's a meritocracy, Will. It's a meritocracy. That's why you're in a closet.
That's true. I do. I pretty much have accomplished little to nothing, but I'm here on this panel with you guys, and that says a lot about you. No, this is interesting. These are interesting points. I think that. I'm echoing, I think, too. But I think that people think that wealth is transferred and wealth is distributed and wealth is not created. Again, it's back to that point where, it's okay if you take it from someone else and it finally comes to me because wealth is merely a transfer. Or wealth is paper. The government can just print. There are people that literally, most of my political science, to be honest, essays are satire. I have to look at it from a satirical standpoint because what I'm writing is so unbelievable. That I write things that money is wealth. The government needs to print more, and I get A's. I'm not kidding. I write from.
That's what they're teaching.
I'm writing it, and I'm writing about whites whites are all racist and they're white supremacists, and I'm nailing it. I'm getting A's, and capitalism is bad. Capitalism is the theft of labor. I'm literally writing about Karl Marx's discredited labor theory of value, which is probably perhaps one of the most ridiculous things in the history of economic thought. And I'm getting A's. So I mean, I think this is certainly among intellectuals. This stuff is disseminated, and then these people, all these kids in my class never ask questions, and they go out and they talk to their family about it, and then they see it in popular culture in Hollywood, and they're just inundated with it. And I don't see any well-spoken, and you guys can maybe you do. I don't see any well-spoken people within the movement that can really elucidate these kind of free market principles in a way that people can relate to. That's why I think your Short Answers to Tough Questions book is such a great idea, because these are tough questions, and when I answer them, I'm getting into the nuts and bolts of it. I will destroy your argument, but what I'm not giving them is a little snippet, something that's, oh, you hate the poor, give the poor things. It's easy for the left to do that. It's a lot harder for me to explain how the free market works, how wealth is created, and how, increasing the pie and increasing more wealth helps everybody.
Well, I think it's easy to comprehend for a lot of people. Like, I think that the idea of wealth as a fixed pie, the idea that wealth is transferred, is simple for people to comprehend. Right. Because I don't think that they see, and it's really a failure to understand history. Like, I don't think people can see history as people lived in even like the 1960s, 1950s. I think, and you hear this all the time from the left. You hear, oh, in 1970 we had less income inequality, so everyone was better off because of that. Mm-hmm. Who the hell wants? Like, I don't want to live. I mean, Kevin was probably like what, 40 by then?
Yeah, Kevin was about 52.
I don't want to. I don't want to live in the 1970s.
It was tough. We had Atari 2600.
Oh,
I mean, seriously.
Yeah. And I'm over here earning, like what would probably be considered a decent like post-grad income, and I'm playing like Call of Duty online with someone in like China,
yeah, I know.
And like on my iPhone and talking with you guys.
I'm poor. I have a MacBook and an iPhone. I literally am poor. I eat cereal all day, and I have a MacBook and an iPhone.
That's an Obama phone. That's an Obama phone. That's how you got it,
the rich in 1970 didn't have what I had. I do drive a 1982 Mercury Capri though, but that's awesome.
That's pretty cool though.
Thank you.
I think it was Kevin.
That's what I mean. Like no one sees it as a longevity issue. They see it as a here and now issue. They see it as a very static, this year only, or the last like post-recession. That's what you hear all the time. Post-recession, and I'm like, what? Who cares? That's like the recession was what, a few years ago? Human beings have been on this earth for freaking billions of years. Shut up.
Exactly. They're very nearsighted with that stuff.
I think it was Kevin or maybe it was Jason at We Are Capitalists, or a combination of the two, pointed out that people say that, oh, well, you can't afford your living expenses today. Living expenses are so high. But when you look at what the basic American has, and even the poorest of the basic Americans, they'll have 2 cars, 2 TVs with cable, internet, cell phone, a video gaming system, a microwave, a fridge. So basic living expenses are what we consider basic living expenses today. Even 30 years ago weren't even close to that. So the standard of living, even when you're poor, is much higher than the standard of living was for the middle class not 30, 40 years ago. And I can't remember who pointed that out, but that was a great point.
Yes, of course we are creating more poverty than we need to. Oh, and did you want to say something?
No, I was just pointing out that I was the one who said that genius quote that Mike was just referring to. It
was great, Kevin. Thank you.
I was the genius who came up with that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's these economic issues that I think are the hardest to get across to people. I think part of it is, and certainly the things that have happened at Mizzou, we talked before we came on about things that happened at Mizzou, at Missouri, University of Missouri, and what literally intellectuals, the things they're saying is that, one, there is no truth. 2, I know it's.
I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't laugh.
No, look, I laugh in class.
I cry.
I laugh. There is the first day of class in political science courses, and this happens in sociology departments. It's all very postmodern. Subjectivity is okay. Subjectivity is good. And I said, well, why am I taking this course if we can all just literally? It's on stories and narratives, and it's not on. What evidence do you have? Oh, we don't use evidence. It's a social. Evidence is a social construct. Now, I said to them, get rid of our biology department. Why do we have chemistry? if chemistry is a social construct, just write stories about chemistry. Write stories about how the body works.
If
You know what I mean?
it's a social construct, let's get rid of the FDA.
Get rid of that institution. Oh no! And then when you try to argue within institutions, you can't do that. But you have to take it outside the institution. And then when you argue outside the institution, it's incredible what goes on.
Yeah.
And
I find it helpful. Yeah, I find it helpful in situations like that to have a short snippet that kind of stuns them, so that, So that's why when somebody asks me about the poor, I like to say, well, poverty as we know it today is created by government, regulations and licensing laws. And they go, huh? And then, you have a chance to come back and say, well, you're interested in knowing more because, no one's considered that. But, you need to, obviously, you have to train yourself to do that, and I'm not always perfect at it myself, but you really have to get people's attention.
I do that a lot. I do that a lot in academia. Like I said, when someone says that there is no truth, I'll raise my hand and said, that's just self-defeat. You said there is no truth. Is that true? Now look at me. You know what I mean? Like they haven't thought of it. Or they said that, the difference between genders is merely social. And I'll raise my hand and say, I'm pregnant and I'm expecting in 9 months.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think you're right to a degree. You have to expose the lunacy of the statement in one sentence. I mean, it really resonates with the kids that I'm in the class with. I'm 32. I'm in class with kids that are 19 and 20, and they absorb this stuff. And they're yeah, I'm Mexican American, but when I go to Mexico, I'm not. They don't welcome me there because I'm American, and here I don't fit in. I'm like, what do you mean you don't fit in here? I'm the only white kid in class. You know what I mean? I don't see you having any other problems. You're in a university. You're at a university getting an education. What do you mean? How don't you fit in? In what ways? I don't understand. So I mean, I'm the outcast in the class. So where aren't you fitting in? I don't get it. So I mean, they're told these things. They're like, yeah, that's it. That's it. It's this guy has so much money. They don't understand where it comes from, and they're just it's envy politics essentially.
Yeah, and it's been encouraged. I mean, when you think about it. The whole idea of our government saying it's okay if we aggress is teaching something very important to the students. It's saying that aggression's okay. So it's hard to get surprised when we have a society where there is a lot of aggression. And, look what we're doing overseas. I mean, I really cringe because we are killing a lot of innocent people with our bombs. We call it collateral damage and just don't worry about it, but what it means is we're killing, innocent people. And I like to say karma doesn't wait till the next lifetime. Our country is going to pay for that in some way. It probably already is.
I'm interested to know, I know you ran for the Libertarian presidential nomination in 2004 and 2008, correct?
2008, not 4.
Okay, so just 2008. And did you run against Wayne Allen Root? He was on our show. He was on our show previously.
Oh yes, I was on. I mean, he and Bob Barr were my opponents. Yes.
Did you get along with Wayne?
No, I did not.
I knew it. I just know him. I know him, and I know how he is, and I just figured that you guys would clash.
I don't blame you at all. I can see why.
I mean, he's from the Bronx. I'm from New York. I understand Wayne. So that's why I can appreciate his character. But I could totally see it, and I was dying to ask that question.
Well, it wasn't that. It's a philosophical break. I mean, he's if you... I don't think he believes in the non-aggression principle, and that's kind of hard for me to see someone at the top of our ticket who doesn't, although that happened anyhow, so...
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but that's okay, and maybe we should get into that. But that's kind of the challenge of the Libertarian Party right now, not the movement, but the party. The party managed to keep its philosophical basis, its soul, so to speak, for a long time. I think now it's unfortunately selling out at just the time when we've been given permission to be radical in a sense by the success of the Ron Paul campaign.
What do you think of Gary Johnson then, and Austin Peterson?
Well, Gary Johnson certainly is, I mean, in many, many ways. I liked him a lot better than the 2008 ticket, but I sure don't like the part about end the income tax and replace it with the sales tax. I like what Harry Brown did, and the income tax and replace it with nothing. Yeah. That's certainly a more libertarian stand. So, yeah, that's...
Okay. Do you know Austin Peterson was also running?
I don't know him personally, but I know that he's, from what little I've read about him, he doesn't seem to be that happy with the non-aggression principle. So that kind of,
yeah.
yeah, that doesn't sit well with me. I haven't talked with him, so I mean, I don't want to, you know, I haven't conversed with him, so maybe maybe there's something there that I've missed, but from what I can see, that just doesn't sit well with me. I mean, if you see, the reason Ron Paul got so much attention was because he was very consistent. And now, all of a sudden, by 2004, everyone knew, finally, remember, I've been working in this party since the 80s, they finally knew what we were. The media knew our stands on everything. And what do? We put people on the top of the ticket that don't align with that, and we're just destroying our brand, I think. Now, the good news is there's many other ways to come into the movement today. Back in the 80s, even the early 90s, really the only way to get in the movement, pretty much, was to come in through the Libertarian Party. And that's no longer true, thankfully.
Do you think,
because if it were, we'd have trouble.
But do you think the Libertarian Party marginalizes people that perhaps aren't pure enough in that sense, that if you don't subscribe to the NAP, but you have many other libertarian positions, that it will alienate people, and then you lose donors, and you lose, you know, then you'll lose power, and you'll really, I mean, you'll be where the Libertarian Party is today.
Well, we got there by, I think, by doing just the opposite. We got there by not being true to ourselves. I mean, in my opinion, if you look at, I was on the LNC for several terms, so I saw the stats about our growth. And the two campaigns that brought in the fewest number of new members were the Johnson campaign and the Barr campaign. So what does that tell you?
Couldn't that be because Ron Paul, who was mostly a libertarian, was running during both campaigns and kind of funneling off some of those funds that might normally go to a libertarian candidate, though?
I'm not talking about funds. I'm talking about membership. We could have had,
or membership for that matter. Well, if you're a libertarian and you see Ron Paul running as a Republican, would you not maybe consider registering as a Republican or being more Republican to support essentially a libertarian, as opposed to being in a party that gets marginalized for 3 decades?
Well, actually, Bob Barr antagonized Ron Paul so much that he came out and said, instead of not endorsing anyone, he wasn't going to endorse anyone, but he ended up endorsing the Constitution Party candidate because Bob Barr aggravated him so much. Bob Barr, they all had a, Ron Paul had invited all the minor party candidates to a press conference, and he kept saying, Bob Barr's on his way, Bob Barr's on his way. Well, Bob Barr wasn't on his way. He stood him up at the press conference and then had his own 2 hours later in which he said, oh, Ron Paul, you should be my VP candidate, which is against the LNC rules and everything else. And he insulted him, you know, because, of course, Ron Paul's better known than Bob Barr. If there was going to be a switch in candidates, which there couldn't be by the rules, but if there were going to be, Barr should have offered him his position. He didn't. So,
Mary, did you watch the debate yesterday?
No, I did not.
Okay. You know, who, if you had, I mean, obviously, if you had to pick a candidate on the Republican ticket, which perhaps I don't think you would, but if you did, would it be Rand Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably the closest to libertarian. I hope he's much more libertarian. He's been sounding a little more libertarian lately. I hope that continues. But
okay, so let me get to the guys. I want to see their winners and losers of the debate because I know they saw it.
Okay.
Go ahead, Grant.
I didn't watch the debate in entirety because mostly debate are just a circus act, and I don't really care to hear. I watched the highlights, you know. But my winner is going to be Rand Paul simply because of the campaign, the campaign growth that I think he generated and the image that he put out during the debate. I think he did a really great job from what I could see. He kind of missed a few questions in my opinion, but he did overall. I think he did a really great job.
He's your winner?
My loser of the week is going to be that professor from Mizzou who was fired because she went on this crazy tirade towards some media person, I don't know who they were, about, I guess, something about white privilege and oppression, and I don't know. But what was shocking about her is that she teaches, well, excuse me, he's currently studying 50 Shades of Grey, and she teaches a class. Let me see if I get this right. Oh, she studies the relationship that Lady Gaga has with her social media followers.
Well, that's important.
And for the life of me, I can't figure out why college is so expensive.
Well, that's why, because they're studying the issues that are important to people, Grant. And Lady Gaga's social media proclivities and 50 Shades of Christian's Anatomy, or whatever. What is it?
50 Shades of Grey.
Grey's Anatomy, 50 Shades of whatever.
I think she actually went on a hiatus to study that book.
Yes, that's more important than obviously reading Road to Serfdom.
Yeah.
Kevin, your winners and losers specifically in the debate. I know you know. You have winners and losers.
Yeah, well, the winner for the first time I've ever actually said this was Rand. I think, unlike what you said, Will, you said that he just did not have a good debate performance and so forth.
No, that was before I saw the end of it, where he cleaned it up and did better. But his exchange with Rubio is a give or take. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think he came across as being, his whole line about "I'm the only real conservative here," I think to some people it actually made sense. I mean, you can only be a conservative as long as you're actually holding the line on government. And all the other people out there, including Rubio, they want to increase spending. They want to, for the military or for their favorite programs or whatever. And like Mary said earlier, the conservatives and the liberals are really pretty close in terms of what they want out of government. And I think at least to Rand's credit, he's trying to draw the difference and say, that's not conservative, I'm conservative. So I gave him the winner of the week. The loser is not from the debate, but I think it's higher education as a whole. After what happened in Missouri, in terms of what happened with the president stepping down, just completely caving in to basically bullies. I mean, the team, the football team came together and basically said, we're not going to play if you don't, do what we ask you to do. And he knows, and the college knows, that they're going to lose millions of dollars if they don't have a football game. And so I suspect that the trustees got to him and said, you know what, get out of here. There's money at stake, and let's just say what they want us to say and move on. The real loser is higher education, because they're being basically told what to do.
They're reaping what they sow, buddy.
Exactly.
And I see it firsthand, and I mean, it's really hard to listen to. It really is. So they deserve it. Mike, your winners and losers of the debate.
Well, I had to address what Kevin said really quick about Mizzou with these football players, and I understand that maybe they did get to him and say, hey, we're going to lose millions of dollars if you don't have this football game. But at the same time, this is 25 players. There's a 120-man roster on this team. I think if they would have went out there minus those 25 players, maybe got their butts kicked, but they would have got a lot of media attention for going out there. People would have came to that game to see what was going on. They probably would have made up that money anyway. So the losers there in your situation are higher education. Yeah, Mizzou, but they should have stood their ground and not kowtowed to these people.
I agree, but
good point.
I totally agree. Or I would have just said, yeah, if you don't play, pull your scholarship. How about that? Right. Or let's dive into your grades. Let's see how your academic performance is. You know what I mean? I don't know. They did. It's amazing that they have the students running the campus now.
And so Kevin's right. The losers are higher education, but I thought, hey, maybe they could have played that game and still stood their ground.
Right.
As far as the debate, as you were saying, my losers from the debate, I have a co-loser from the debate because I think John Kasich was a loser.
I was waiting for that. Points,
I mean, a lot of his points were completely asinine, but one was extremely asinine, where he said sometimes you have to throw away economic theory and just help people.
Oh, I killed him.
In regards to the minimum wage.
No, he said isn't
economic theory about helping people?
Economic theory is nice, but that doesn't help in reality. I got it. It's seared into my mind. Supply and demand doesn't matter. But reality matters.
That was pretty bad. I'm going to give a loser to Ted Cruz, too. Because and the only reason here is because I have higher expectations for Ted Cruz, and Ted Cruz's answer about free trade and putting restrictions on imports or higher taxes on imports because it would help protect American jobs. I think anybody that is a supporter of the free market realizes that that's completely asinine. My winner is in line with everybody else. I think it was Rand Paul. I think he had his first actually good debate So I think that he has to be the winner. He stood out. I liked his exchange with Rubio. I know you didn't, but I thought he had his best debate. So I'm going to say Rand Paul was the winner there.
Yeah, I'd like to say Rand Paul, but I don't think he was a winner. I think some of his answers on foreign policy, I'm speaking as an analyst here, aren't going to appeal to the broader base of the Republican Party. It's just not going to happen. And I think that I think he did well in the debate. I think he finally spoke up, certainly on addressing the Federal Reserve. Ted Cruz addressed the Federal Reserve. Were certainly good things, and criticizing Rubio's what was it, his tax kickback for kids.
Yeah.
I think it was that was on point. But he's the thing is he's touting Reagan's policies, and at the same time it's like, well, Reagan increased spending. How can you claim you're a Reaganite, but Reagan increased spending on defense?
Okay, but Reagan increased spending on defense during the Cold War.
Right. Well,
this isn't the Cold War anymore.
No, it's not the Cold War.
But you can't say that. Oh, Reagan increased spending on defense, and Rand Paul can't claim to have.
So there are no
defense policy because he won't increase spending.
Right. So you're saying that there is no threats to the United States of America
there's definitely threats to the United States of America, but it's definitely not as big as the Soviet Union was. And Reagan increased defense spending, but Reagan increased defense spending while being the first president to actually lower domestic spending. None of these other Republicans are willing to do that. Rand Paul is. So that in itself, to me, being able to get on stage and point that out, that was a big win for Rand Paul.
And when Reagan did it, it was a strategy to bankrupt the Soviet Union, essentially, in terms of Star Wars and so forth. So, and it worked.
But again, his Civil War point, we don't get involved in civil wars. Reagan supported the Contras. He invaded Grenada. Look, you can't claim his mantle. At least be bold and say, look, I'm not Reagan. I'm a non-interventionist. I don't want to get involved in these wars. At least stand on principle. I think it's cowardly to use Reagan and misinterpret or misconvey what Reagan really did.
Well, keep in mind we're talking about the same guy that said that he would make Milton Friedman or Hayek his chairman of the Federal Reserve. So he doesn't really have a good history of being able to compare people to who he would have run things. So he might be missing on a little bit of his Reagan legacy there.
Well, I don't think there's a problem with
having those two
running it.
Well, there isn't. I wouldn't have a problem with either of those people, but you have to understand those would be two completely different people with different policies running the Fed. So I would assume you'd have to change. You can't say, oh, well, it'd be a close race between those two for me because they'd have completely different policies.
Yeah, but Hayek would. Hayek knows there's no gold standard, and he would understand that the Fed has to. He would have a natural rate of interest at least. If you're looking at, I can't have a gold standard, he would, just like Friedman, there'd be a natural rate of interest. I don't know if he would manipulate prices on money. I doubt that. I would.
Friedman was the first person to come out in favor of QE type policies back in the late 90s in the libertarian circles, and I don't think Hayek would have supported that. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't put words in Friedman's mouth. I never really heard him ever support easing or monetary stimulation. I've only heard
about his solutions for Japan.
Japan stagnated for 20 years. I don't know. I think and he highlighted that. He highlighted that the inflation problem that they had, didn't he?
He highlighted that the way that Japan could get out of their economic turmoil would be to buy government bonds to increase the money supply and buy up some of these assets, similar to how we've done that in the United States post-recession.
Yes.
I think he actually talked about this a couple of years ago. Friedman was one of the first in conservative/libertarian circles to actually suggest something like this.
I don't know the situation in Japan, but you could make a case if deflation's a problem. I don't think he would use it as stimulus. I think he would use it as MV equals PQ.
He might, yeah, but you have to understand, Hayek wouldn't even touch anything like that. This would be completely different.
I think Hayek, in a practical world, would say you have to have the quantity of money equaling, trading against the proper amount of goods and services. Otherwise, you can't have it inflated, and you can't have it deflated. Meaning that money has to remain neutral.
I get you. Kevin's getting pissed off over here. So,
but before we go, I want to give a shout out to Evidence Doesn't Matter, Francis McCloskey. I just want to.
And also Happy Veterans Day. Thank you to all the vets. And Mary, can you tell us about your website and again where to get your books?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Well, my books are on Amazon, but you get a better deal at my website, which is ruwart.com, RUWART.com. And also you can go into my free library at my website and get the deadly secrets behind soaring pharmaceutical prices, which is sort of a preview of my new book, Death by Regulation, which should be out next year. And there's a lot of other writings and videos and things you can get, so it's a great place to go. Also, if you sign up for the free library, you will get my newsletter, which right now is putting out a Cliff Notes version of Healing Our World. So there's a lot of benefits to doing that, and of course you can always take yourself off the list if you decide you don't want to do that.
No, read Healing Our World. I'm serious. It's a fantastic book.
And Kevin, did you source Mary's book on the UA Post, a link?
Yeah, yes, I did.
Okay, cool. So there's a link on UA where people can click on get your stuff. And thank you so much, Mary, for coming on. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And
yes, well, I enjoyed it. It was great.
And we'd like to have you back on when your book comes out. That would be awesome.
Well, thank you, and thank all your listeners.
Thank you. And for Grant Phillips over there, who's lounging on his couch playing a video game, thank you so much for hanging in there. Yep, been drinking booze. And to Kevin, who drank all of his scotch before he came on the air. We could tell. And Michael Lee, who's still in the interrogation room there. I don't know.
It's an empty bedroom. This is what happens when you move.
That's
when you get a new place and you don't live in the same closet that you lived in for the last.
I just don't want to know what crime you committed there, pal. Seriously, we're not going to ask. But I don't know what's going on. But Mary, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody for watching. Good night.
Good night.
No.